This video will take you through setting up the simulator for first use. There are two things that need to be set up before you get started and one more which is optional. The first is the overall simulator settings. This will apply to all ferments within the currently selected winery site. The second is to define the fermenters that will be used throughout the winery. Finally, we'll look at ferment profiles, which streamline setting up new ferments. The simulator setup can be accessed from the side menu. This page holds all the site level settings for the ferment simulator and will affect all ferments. It is best to set these up before getting started with any ferments, as changes made here later on may alter any of the data already entered. First, we have some settings that control how data is entered. The DAP grade defines the nitrogen content of the DAP used. Typically this will be around 18 to 21% depending on the product. If you want to work in units of N rather than DAP for additions, you can set this to 100. If you commonly use a different nutrient product, you can enter that nitrogen concentration instead. And if you use a range of products with different nitrogen contents, you may have to use some conversion factors internally when entering your additions. The simulator asks for initial YAN when setting up a ferment, but as not all wineries measure YAN, we provide a default field which will be used when the ferment YAN is left blank. A typical value for Australian grapes would be around 200 milligrams per litre, but this can be quite variable and we recommend measuring YAN for best simulation results. The temperature units can be set between Celsius and Fahrenheit. It is recommended to set this before starting to use the simulator and not to change this later, as no conversions will be made for ferments already entered into the system. The sugar units can be set between Brix and Beaumet. Same goes with this for the temperature units. The red and white sampling frequency switches change the format of the data table for the sampling frequency in the winery. Typically this may differ for different wine types. For example, you may measure twice daily for red ferments and once daily for white ferments. If this changes throughout ferment, it's best to choose twice daily. The simulator will have no problem with blanks left in the data table if you haven't taken a measurement. The day-date display switch changes the format of the data table to show the actual dates, starting from the inoculation date to days, where day 0 is the inoculation date, followed by day 1, day 2, etc. The wine description section controls how batches are named within the ferment simulator. The first field, wine name, is mandatory, as this is how the simulator identifies a ferment, but this can be renamed to something more appropriate if you wish. If you'd like to use the blend code as the only identifier, for example, you could rename the wine name field to blend code and then hide the other two fields. The dashboard customization switches control which fields are shown on the dashboard modules. Now that the site-wide settings have been defined, we need to set up our fermenters. The fermenter setup can be found in the side menu. Tank groups provide a logical way of organising fermenters within the system. You can use these groups to filter the ferments shown on the dashboard. It is best to decide how you would like to group your fermenters now. This may be by physical placement within the winery or tank type. Alternatively, if you run a contract facility, it may be more useful to use tank groups for clients. To create a new tank group, click the Create New Tank Group button. Once you have a few groups, you can start creating fermenters. These would usually be physical tanks. First, select a tank group from the list, then give the tank a name. Once the tank has a name, it should be saved into the list. The description is optional if you'd like to add any other information about the tank. Then enter the tank volume. The tank properties are optional and don't influence the simulator at the moment, but may be used in future versions of the app. Entering them now will just save you doing it later if we do an update that requires them. The fermenter list can be reordered by dragging and dropping fermenters and groups around in the list. This can be useful to order the list to match the lab Beaumet sheet. Once the fermenters in your winery are entered, you're ready to start tracking ferments. Ferment profiles provide a guide for the simulator in terms of what to expect. They are a great way to tell the simulator about your standard practice so that it can take this into account when making predictions. Using ferment profiles is not essential, so you can skip this step and start using the simulator now, but it may make the task of setting up new ferments easier. Ferment profiles give a temperature guide for the simulator to follow, as well as defining any actions that are likely to take place. For example, if pump overs are performed every day or a standard nutrient add is made on day 3 for a ferment, for example, the ferment profile gives the simulator a heads up so that it can include these things in its prediction. Without this, the simulator will assume that the current conditions will prevail until told otherwise. You can enter these forward entries into a new ferment when you set it up manually. The ferment profile simply streamlines this process and pre-fills the data.